Tiana Shoei. I'm an executive, a reader, writer, entrepreneur, athlete, life coach, and energy. This is my podcast, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. Join us as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Shoei, and welcome to my podcast, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Now, today, I've got a really, really special treat for you. We have a guest, the one and only Mr. Scott Miller. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Tiana, thank you for lending your credibility to me and for shining your metaphorical spotlight on me.
Yeah, you guys are in for a huge treat today. Scott is an absolutely incredible person, somebody I've learned a ton from. Now, I told Scott I was going to break the rules a little bit in this episode, because traditionally what I would do right now if I were fancy and formal is I would introduce Scott with his beautiful resume, which I'm going to do. I promise I'm going to get there. But first, I want to tell you how I became a fan of Scott's. So as you guys know, I'm an avid reader. I've got some of my books behind me. And one of the books that I read years ago was The One Thing by Gary Keller. And naturally that led me on to finding the podcast, the One Thing podcast. And one day I was listening to an episode and this rather intelligent young man came on as a guest. And I
like the young part. Forget the intelligent. I just like the young part.
Hey, listen, my grandfather rode 80 miles on his 80th birthday. So I figure if I can keep up with that, that's still young.
Okay, that was humiliating right now for me. Well, good for him.
Right. So what was fascinating is as I was listening to this, Scott taught me a principle in that podcast that if we were to apply this principle to every conversation we have, communication would exponentially increase in value amongst people. And so Scott, I didn't tell Scott what this was in advance. So he's just as surprised as you guys are to hear what this is. Scott, in that episode, you mentioned how you start your conversations by stating your intent. It's such a simple concept, but it's something that we need desperately in this culture. How often do we fail to just state our intent with the audience, with whoever we're speaking with? And so I've actually made that a habit when I open my podcast. My intent for my podcast is, and so with that, I thought that was a great way to start this. I remember listening to that, hearing that and thinking, oh my goodness, how is this the first time I've heard this? What profound wisdom and insight. And so, what's the intent for today's podcast? Well, Scott, as I'm about to introduce, has an incredible resume, a lot we can learn from him. He has recently written a brand new book, Marketing Mess to Brand Success. You can see it in the background of his video. There he is, a copy of his book. I've been privileged enough to get an advanced copy, read it. It's coming out on May 11th. Very soon.
Right?
Yep. And so the intent for today's podcast is to introduce you to Scott, introduce his new book, and walk away a little bit smarter at the end of this than we started at the beginning, right? That's our hope, right? So Scott, if I may, I'd like to do a formal introduction and then let's dive into this book. So Scott has over a 25-year career at Franklin Covey, and you've served in multiple roles since you've been at Franklin Covey. So you've been the chief marketing officer, which is going to be a lot of what we talk about today. You served as an officer and executive vice president. You are currently the senior advisor on thought leadership, leading strategy development, and the publication of the firm's best-selling books, which we're going to talk about some of these books that you're contributing to that list as well. You're also the host of On Leadership, which is a fantastic podcast. And at the very end, I'm going to ask you to tell our followers and my listeners where they can find you. That is a podcast I strongly suggest everybody listen to, because it doesn't matter which episode you pick. You're going to walk away incredibly grateful for the time that you invested in listening to Scott's podcast. It's really just going to knock your socks off. I sit down every time and I'm like, I just got schooled, and I love that. I love that feeling of just getting schooled. Scott is also now a multi-offender author, which, listen, to finish one book is amazing, but to work on multiple books is even more amazing. So, your first book, and I've got a copy of it here, Management Mess to Leadership Success. You're writing a series. We're going to talk about your marketing mess. You've also co-authored some bestsellers, and that is Everyone Deserves a Great Manager and Master Mentors. So 40 transformative insights from our greatest business minds. So, and that doesn't even summarize everything you're up to, Scott. You're a lot busier even than just what I listed. What did I forget?
Oh, man, I might have a stroke if I filled in the cracks. So I'll just go with that. Thank you for the introduction.
But I hope, in that brief introduction that everybody listening can realize that we're really in for a great treat from someone who really truly understands, a broad spectrum of just thriving. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, anybody who picks up your book, Scott and Reed's Marketing Master Brand Success, should ultimately walk away thriving in their marketing position. But before we jump in, can I just make one observation? As I was reading through this, I personally have done marketing in my background, but here's an important observation. Everybody in some capacity does some form of marketing. Yeah. And so, the big takeaway that I think anybody listening to this should hear is marketing is not exclusive to people in marketing. If you have a social media account, you're doing some form of marketing. If you are an employee, you are marketing your skills to your employer. And so I think that there are key takeaways as we go through the book that are important for anybody, because at some point in time, you are marketing yourself or your skills or your business. And so many of the things that you teach us in this book are applicable to anyone and everyone, because we all have to know how to tell people about who we are and what we're doing, which is really kind of the heart of marketing.
Tiana, so well said. I would take it even a step further. And that would be, if you're a human, you're in marketing. Yes. Because you're marketing yourself to prospective dates.
Yes.
Right? You're marketing yourself to professors, to, your children, your in-laws, to your neighbors, to your community members, to your committee members. So you're exactly right. Marketing is a principle that has some foundational, proven practices that all of us should align with. And I'm ready to talk about them. Great intro.
Me too. Well, thank you. So the first thing that I loved, this is how I knew I was in for a good book. Chapter 1, and I've got my little card here because I love these challenges. The book is broken into 30 challenges, which is a fantastic way, by the way, to dive into this topic of marketing. And chapter 1, it's the customer stupid.
Yeah.
So, Scott, this is something that I think we often forget when we're marketing. We tend to see the things from our perspective and fail to remember that we're not marketing to ourselves.
That's exactly right. The chapter of the book is just a reminder that in any organization, whether you're working for a global Fortune 5000 or you're a small mom and pop or entrepreneurs, that there is a natural gravitational pull, a gravity that has you focused, obsessed on your revenue, your margin, your mission, your product, your purpose, all of that. And you need to balance that with recognizing that at the end of the day, none of that matters if there isn't a customer. And so I share a couple of stories. The first challenge, and you mentioned there are 30 challenges in my book. All my books have 30 chapters. I apologize in advance if that's too many. But they're short, they're breezy, they're funny. The first chapter is a first challenge called It's the Customer Stupid, modeled after the 1992 presidential campaign with Bill Clinton and Al Gore. And you remember James Carville and Paul Begala, the famous political operatives, had this sign in their Little Rock campaign headquarters called "It's the Economy Stupid," because that's how they were going to win against, then President George H.W. Bush and Vice President Quayle. You get the point. It's the economy stupid. It's the customer stupid. So it was just sort of a shot across the bow to recognize that you need to be as obsessively focused on your client's revenue goals as you are on your own revenue goals, your client's mission, as much as your own. Quite frankly, your client doesn't give a crap about your mission. Right. Your client gives a crap about, do they have a problem that they have money to solve, and you have a solution that exactly matches their needs. So it was just a bit of a shocker to recognize you're going to have to resist the irresistible draw that all of us face every day to balance how much time we're obsessed with ourselves, our business, our purpose, our supply chain, our cost of goods, our profit margins, our brand, our website, with all of that of our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, what a fantastic way to start this book. And that's when I was like, I'm in for a treat. And for those of us who have read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, what I love about what you've done in this book is you've taken those concepts and you've modernized them. And that is one of
Oh,
those.
I gotta quote you on that. That's golden, girl. I think I heard you say Scott is the modern day Dale Carnegie. I think that's what you said.
Exactly, verbatim were my words. Yes. but I think that's very valuable because, Dale Carnegie really introduced an invaluable concept, and you've taken it and you've made it digestible for those of us living in the 21st century. And I think that's really, really an invaluable tool. And, like you said, if you're a human being, this applies to you. And so therefore that topic you just covered applies to said human beings, right?
Yeah. Regardless of how large and fast growing your company is, where it's a side hustle, right? It's just, it's not about, it's only about the customers. That raising that consciousness of it's natural to be fixated on your own internal things. And you got to recognize that you're going to have to kind of move your spotlight constantly away from yourself onto your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So now I want to dig into challenge 7. I love this one, and I'm going to ask you to talk about it. Bruise hard and heal fast. One of the things I think we face a pandemic of in our culture is ego, and ego and business don't work well together. And you tell a really fascinating story. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love you to dig in and talk about this story that you tell in chapter 7, because I love that you quote Ernest Hemingway and you say, another lesson that is every first idea isn't going to work. Welcome to the life of constantly iterative world that is marketing. And you say, even Ernest Hemingway admitted the first draft of anything isn't shit.
Yeah. The big idea here, and to your opening point around all these principles are relatable regardless of what role you're in. In fact, many of the reviewers of the book said, Scott, this is as much a leadership book as it is a marketing book, right? My first book, as you mentioned, was Management Mess to Leadership Success. This is an interpersonal principle. Bruise hard, heal fast.
Yeah.
And that is, I'll tell you, a skill post-pandemic, a skill pre-pandemic, but a competency post-pandemic for sure is emotional agility, right? It's intellectual nimbleness. It's those that can adapt and change the fastest. Those are the ones that are going to thrive in this unrecognizable world that we're living in. The economy's coming back. It's exploding positively globally right now. But it's the people that can turn on a dime the fastest that are going to be those that are the most resilient, whether it be with your family, whether your kids' education, your business, your customers, your business model. So the concept is bruise hard, heal fast. And that is, stuff's not going to work. You're going to get feedback that your podcast interview isn't as good as you hoped it was, that your book isn't as resonant as you were convinced it was, or you get the point, right? Your dinner wasn't tonight what your kids wanted it to be after you managed somehow to get dinner in the midst of all your day. Bruise hard, heal fast. Mm-hmm. I think it's self-evident in the principle. The story I share, I think, was of a tireless project that I led and a very competent team of marketers reporting to me, working with me. And the CEO basically said, yeah, back to the drawing board after a lot of work if I had the story right. And I wanted to punch him out. I wanted to punch his lights out. Now, I love the CEO. We're like father and son, right? And with that comes love and joy and conflict. But I went back to the drawing board because I could have tried to win the battle with him. Mm-hmm. But I would have won the law. I would have lost the war of credibility, the war of, is Scott obsessed with his ideas and can't turn on a dime? And this is just good advice generally, is do you wallow in pity or do you pivot in real time? Because great leaders are more concerned with what is right than being right. That's such a great lens to look through all your relationships. Am I arguing this because I want to be right? Am I advocating for this because my ego is attached? Bruise hard and heal fast, including with feedback from your spouse or from your in-laws or, whatever it is. Don't take it personally. Nothing is personal. I mean, maybe when your spouse tells you your breath is bad, maybe that's personal. But you get the point. I once heard a quote that said, someone else's opinion of you isn't your business. And I don't know that I agree with that thought, but I agree with the mindset of, when you start to step into the public eye like I have, and there are blog sites that are dedicated to my hair and my glasses and how fast I talk and whether or not I stuttered. I have a stutter. I'm a stutterer. I've been through a lifelong education and coaching on moving out of being a stutterer. But maybe everyone's opinion of me isn't my business, but I can't care about it. I cannot care about everyone's opinion of me. I have things said about me every day on the web and on social media and inside the company, right? People don't like me. Not everyone likes me. And there's a fine line between saying, I don't care, because of course you care,
right,
and being able to discern what matters, whose intentions do I care about, and then how do I pivot and turn on a dime? Bruise hard, heal fast.
Yeah. And just to reiterate that, I've heard it said before, if you wouldn't take advice from someone, you shouldn't take criticism from them. And I think that kind of, reiterates what you just said. Not everybody who has an opinion about you has a worthwhile or valid or an opinion that you should, that you should take to heart. And that's what was important about this chapter is, like you said, the agility, the ability to say, okay, I get it. This isn't going to work. We're going to just have to deal with it and move on and restructure. And that story you tell is exactly what you said. You get all this work done, you present it to the CEO, and he's like, nope, you're going back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
You just kind of got
I think the big idea, Tiana, that I wanted to resonate in that chapter was not only bruise hard and heal fast, but recognize when you are in fact winning the battle.
Yes.
But you are winning the battle at the expense of winning the war. Now, I don't mean it to be a military analogy, but the point is, I saw so many people that would have digged in and defended it and bullied the CEO into their position and told him or her, in this case him, why they were right and he was wrong. But I watched them win that battle, but then I watched him either isolate them or move them to the Taipei office, right? Or whatever it was, because they weren't collaborative. They always had to win and they weren't able to take the feedback. And so I really learned some valuable lessons at the expense of other people's messes to realize I don't want that to be my reputation. I want my reputation to be stand up when I'm super passionate, but you can only die on one sword. One sword your entire life. So pick that sword really carefully. And at 53 years old, I haven't found that sword yet.
It's about maintaining perspective, right? And
good. That's good marriage advice right there.
Right. Yes, it is. Exactly. And, one of the books that just reiterates this entire principle that you introduced us to is Ray Dalio's book, Principle.
Yeah.
And that is really what you just said in that chapter is a large portion of what Ray Dalio says in that book. And so in other words, I'm saying to listeners and to everybody who's listening right now, that this is such an important truism to hold on to, such a nugget of wisdom that Scott just shared with us. And it's reiterated by the wisest and most successful among us. So pay attention, because he's right about that. When you're gonna fall on your sword, make sure, or when you're gonna, go to battle for something, make sure you're falling on the right swords and going to battle for the right things. Because if not,
no, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just, I forget that this is also podcast. So I'm making my face. If not,
No, I love your nonverbals. I have learned when I am preparing for some feedback about me, critical, negative, about a project. What I will often do is when someone's delivering it to me, I'll say, okay, I'm going to need about 4 minutes and I'm going to see you. I'm going to show up in about 4 minutes. Please forgive me for 4 minutes. And I stew on it and I brood on it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Right. And I say, okay, I need 3 more minutes. Right. And so I give myself permission to be a bit of a, for 4 minutes as I'm kind of working through, but I'm also thinking through, do I agree with them? What is their intention? Have they declared their intent? Is their intent congruent with what they're saying while I'm processing it? And then I give myself 4 minutes. And then I'm back and I say, okay, that's helpful. Or if I think it's not helpful, then I, say, you know what, I'm not sure that's helpful. But I show back up in a way that allows me to calibrate my emotions. But if I do need to blow a little bit of steam, they know I'm not reacting as part of my brand. I'm just sort of bruising hard and healing fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keith Cunningham says it this way: sometimes you need somebody else to tell you your breath stinks.
Did you say Keith Cunningham or did you mean Stephanie Miller? Which
Touche. So one of the other chapters that blew my mind that I feel like is such, again, a gold nugget that is just not talked enough about, and I'm glad you put it in your book, was challenge 11. Define your smallest viable market. And this is such an important concept because, as you point out, in this chapter, you quote Seth Godin, and he says, the relentless pursuit of mass will make you boring. So I'd love for you to expound upon this idea of define your smallest viable market, because this is so counterintuitive, I think, when we see, the world of, I want to get rich and famous, and so therefore I need 11 million people to love me. And how does one define their smallest viable market in this almost backwards mentality we have about marketing?
Yeah, Seth is a good friend of mine. I'll pronounce his last name Godin.
Thank you.
But I don't think it's a right or wrong, right? But Seth Godin, of course, is a prolific writer and author and blogger, one of the most genius marketing leadership minds I've ever encountered. And this is his idea. In fact, Tiana, I'm just an aggregator. I'm not sure I've ever had an original thought in my life, but I'm a studier of people. I'm a studier of messes and successes, my own and others. And this concept was really brought to life in Seth's book, This Is Marketing. Honestly, I think it's the best book ever written about marketing. I highly recommend your viewers and listeners buy Seth's book, This Is Marketing. Prophetic. One of the concepts he allowed me to co-opt and share in my book with credit is this counterintuitive concept of smallest viable market, because most of us think of the largest viable market. What is the most number of people who will read my book? Who is your book written for? Well, really everybody can read my book, right? And who is your restaurant for? Everybody. Wait, it's like an acai bowl with tofu. Everybody? Right. Yeah, everybody. And it's idiotically arrogant, right? And perhaps for your small business loan, or perhaps for your raising money from your venture capital, you built the largest viable market for your business plan. But leave that there, because the fact of the matter is, as a leader, you should be thinking about your smallest viable market. Who is the one person, the first person that should subscribe to my podcast? What is the name of the first person who should buy my service or product? And then what is the next person and the next person? How few customers could you have an amazing experience with to accomplish your goals? And so again, it's hard. It's counterintuitive. Like, it's the customer stupid. Is what is your smallest viable market? I think too often in business, we do what we call net fishing versus spear fishing. We cash out a huge net when we're looking for grouper. And in that net are like eels and sharks and tires and rusted bicycles, as opposed to, and I'm sorry for the visual, but like a spearfish and boom.
Right. Now
it takes more discipline, takes more focus. It takes resisting the temptation to think of the largest viable market. You're not going to change the world. I'm not going to change the world. But you know what? I reached 70,000 people. Right. Changed a couple of lives, right? Same, I hope this one reaches, a lot more also. So the chapter is great, but if you really want to study the topic, buy Seth's book, This Is Marketing. The chapter is from him, Your Smallest Viable Market. It really requires you to look at your market through a kaleidoscope, which is what most of us do, and instead look at it through like a telescope, right? Like, how small could you get so you perfect your value proposition, your product, your offering, your messaging as well?
Yeah, no,
you're picking good chapters. You're picking great challenges.
Well, this was great. I had a lot of fun reading this, and I love something you said in this chapter. You said it takes extraordinary discipline and patience to carefully and deliberately build up from your smallest viable market instead of falling back from the largest. And I love that. It takes discipline and patience to carefully and deliberately. Yeah. And I think those three words, discipline, patience, and being deliberate, are really important in this.
I'll tell you, I think is the best person I've ever seen at this. And this is a dear friend of mine. I'm very loyal to her. And she's had a rough couple of weeks and months. And that's Rachel Hollis. If any of you follow Rachel Hollis, she's had a rough couple of months with some posts that she's written, some videos she's said. And if I was her publicist, I would have counseled her to act differently. But I'm loyal to Rachel, and I really like her. Rachel Hollis, of course, the amazing author, podcaster, blogger, from, Girl Wash Your Face, Girl Stop Apologizing. And Rachel has defined her smallest viable market better than anybody I've ever met in my life. In fact, she's so clear on who her market was. She calls her, I'm in conversation with her. I'm in conversation in a relationship with her, and she can tell you who her is. And it's why her brand exploded. Now, like I said, Rachel's had some difficulties the past few weeks, and I intend to remain loyal to her because, when the world walks out, a friend walks in, and I like her. And I think all of us, when we're in the public eye, we can say things that get misinterpreted. And it's hard sometimes for people to accept your apology. But if you want to study someone's career that has put this into practice, I've never met someone better than Rachel Hollis.
Yeah. And I will say, you're absolutely right. And for those listening that don't know who Rachel Hollis is, she may not resonate with some of the middle-aged gentlemen who listen to this podcast. So don't go look her up if you're a middle-aged gentleman, because she's a cute little thing, but
I loved her books, quite frankly. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
her demographic is females, but if you want to learn a lot about your wife or your partner or your spouse or your daughter, read her books.
Read her books. But to your point, Rachel started just having genuine, authentic conversations with ladies, moms, young women. And she grew to be, one of the most well-known influencers in a very short period of time because exactly what you said, Scott, because she adhered to this concept. And so, whether you're a Rachel fan or not is irrelevant. Scott's point is very well taken, which is she is a perfect example, prime example of what this looks like. Another influencer who is very much like this is Gary Vee. Gary Vee is another prime example of that. He was often criticized for his foul language and just kind of the way he did it, but he started off as being the wine guy. And now there are very few people who don't know who Gary Vee is.
Right. The wine guy. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah.
You can tell that you read a voracious amount because your span of information and ability to recall it is remarkable, Tiana. Remarkable.
Thank you. I am a little bit of a bookworm, but you know what? I live in the country, so it's perfect. All right. So the next challenge that I wanted to talk to you about, and I was showing Scott earlier, for those of you who are just listening, I have his book all marked up. So I did have a little agenda for today. I'm one who really loves organic conversation, but Scott told me I could throw fastballs at him. So here we go.
Yeah.
We're going
to
jump into chapter 14. This goes very much in line with Bruise Hard and Heal Fast. Be willing to change your mind. And as somebody who has got, almost 20 years now in the business world, I can tell you that if all of us just took this one principle and applied it to our work, our relationships, our life in general, life would be so much happier. We would be singing more Jimmy Buffett songs and less on edge, because being willing to change your mind is an invaluable principle. And Scott, I would like you to dive into this a little bit more, but it's an invaluable principle in every aspect of our life, including, the very topic we're talking about.
So Tiana, you're the actually first podcast host that's asked me about this particular challenge. So if I don't use the right words, please forgive me, because I'm still kind of working through what words I want to use to describe this chapter, although I wrote the chapter, obviously. And that is, I think it's also a leadership competency. I think it's a marital competency. I think it's a parenting competency. I mean, my wife and I have 3 sons, 6, 9, and today our oldest is 11. And our 11-year-old is really growing and stretching, right? I mean, I used to have him dressed like a prep from the East Coast, and we had certain things about what a gentleman was. And he's now wanting to skateboard, and he's wanting to wear, hoodies, and he's a beautiful boy. And I'm having to change my mind on what I thought was going to be my parenting style. I'm having to literally, change my mind about how I'm going to parent him, different from my 9-year-old, different from our 6-year-old. This is a leadership competency. So many people will say, well, I got 20 years of experience. What you probably have is 1 year of experience repeated 19 times. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like a cliche or a throwaway sentence, but think about that. You see these politicians that change their position on pro-life or, pro-choice or other things like that. And I don't mean that to be political at all, but you can grow and keep your values intact. You don't have to compromise your values. Right. Or even your beliefs to change your mind, because there are new facts, there are new realities, there are new pressures, there are new constituencies, there are new customers, there's new competitors. Again, it goes back to one of my opening thoughts: it's the agile thinker, it's the person who is the most flexible that is going to dominate this next economy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's the person who's going to have the most enduring marriage.
Yes.
Or the person who's in a relationship or friendship. I mean, I have a lot of friends that if I actually friended them based on how they voted in the last election, I wouldn't have any friends left, right? And so that doesn't mean I change my mind about whether they should or should not have voted for this person. It means, what's my criteria for friendship, right? It's a lot of lonely, righteous people. And so there's this adage of stand for something or fall for everything. I like that. There's this adage of, I don't want to work for or be the leader who just agrees with the most persuasive, charismatic person who pitched to me last. But there's this sort of balance, this nexus of not compromising your values, understanding governing principles of human behavior. And in the middle there is how nimble, how agile, how emotionally agile are you to move off your entrenched position? Are you willing to change your mind? Are you willing to challenge your entrenched mindsets, your paradigms, your belief systems about religions and cultures and sexual proclivities and LGBTQ plus members? And what does it mean to transition? And we're being bombarded with things that we never had to address in our early years. I'm much older than you, but ask yourself, when is the last time you fundamentally changed your mind? I bet you a lot of people have. I bet you everybody has subconsciously coming out of the pandemic, right? I mean, who's not less interested in stuff and money in the last year, right? Do I really need 3 cars? Do I need a 5,000 square foot home? Do I need a designer handbag or whatever it is, right? I mean, we're all probably changing our mind more than we realize. But as a leader, as a marketer, as an entrepreneur, you might confront yourself around how easily are you able to change your mind.
You know, Scott, there was a lot packed in what you just said.
Sorry.
And I know it's great. I love it. You know, like I told everybody listening, you're in for a treat. So I want to hit on something you said. I actually wrote a blog very similar to what you said. And in my blog, I point out, if you can't look back and disagree with yourself at some point in time, you're not growing. And what does our friend Tony Robbins say? If you're not growing, you're dying. And so there's almost this counterintuitive sense to changing your mind means I was wrong, but being able to say I was wrong means you're growing. And that is something we should celebrate and not look at and go, oof, yuck. And, you know, you made a couple comments about leadership, and this is something my listeners are very familiar with. So I'm going to say it again because I think it's very relevant to this discussion. One of my favorite leaders is Jocko Willink. And in chapter 2 of his book, Extreme Ownership, no bad teams, only bad leaders. And so, you know, as you talk about leadership, and I am a huge advocate, proponent. I love leadership. You quote Liz Wiseman, Multipliers. That is, in my opinion, every leader needs to read that book. Same with your management success or management mess to leadership success. Leadership is something that people take for granted in this culture. It is a skill that should be developed like any other skill. And if you are a leader in any capacity, and we've talked about different types of leadership so far, parenting, relationships, in the work world, if you are a leader in any capacity, you should take growing as a leader serious, because it has serious ramifications. And all the things you talked about changing your mind, leaders are the first ones to say, here's a new way to think about something. That's what leadership is, right? It's going where nobody else has gone. It's being willing to forge a new path. It's being willing to be courageous about something.
Why are we not co-authoring a leadership book? Why am I not endorsing your leader? Where is your leadership book, Tiana? I got publishers. I can make some connections for you. You're right on it. You're right on it.
But it's so important, Scott. And this is something that I feel like it's a conversation we need to have in this country. Like, take being a leader serious. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
You know, I wrote extensively in my first book around how not everyone should be a leader of people. Mm-hmm. And that's not a very common, popular point, right? There's a lot of companies, including Franklin Covey, to tell you the truth, has popularized this idea of everyone's a leader. Everyone should aspire to leadership. I don't agree with that. I think you can lead yourself, you can lead a project, but not everyone should be a leader of people. Just like not everyone should be an engineer or an anesthesiologist or, God forbid, a commercial airline pilot.
Right.
Leading people is not for everyone. But if you are going to pursue that path, there are fundamental principles that can be taught.
Yes.
I guess everyone could be a leader of people. The question is, should everyone be a leader of people? I mean, I guess I could be an anesthesiologist with 30 years of training, not 9, but is it worth it? Is that my calling? I think you're absolutely right. I interviewed Jocko's co-author, Leif Babin. I think one of the top 10 leadership books I've ever read is Extreme Ownership.
Yes.
And I went into this book thinking, okay, great. I'm going to have to translate military principles on display in Ramadi, Iraq, into No, it was insane how relevant, piercingly insightful these military leadership principles were into every size, mission type of organization. Highly recommend Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, I do.
And Extreme Leadership.
Yeah, I do too. And his follow-up book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, is also another really great book. Jocko, what makes Jocko special is he's highly intelligent, but he has a way of distilling information down to simple. And that is one of the leadership principles he teaches in that book. So I just, like I said, there's a lot packed into your comment, and I wanted to make a few comments on that because, this is great stuff. I'm loving this conversation, by the way, Scott. So thank you for indulging me.
I'm loving it, Tiana. Why aren't you working for Franklin Covey? I'm sure we'd love to hire you. What farm are you on again? Where is it?
I'm out in the middle of nowhere in South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Yeah. Hey, it gives me a lot of time to read, which is my favorite hobby.
That's awesome.
All right. So now this next chapter that I want to talk to you about, this was such a cool concept. I loved this chapter because it's so unique and it's not something, again, that's often talked about. So challenge 15, friend your competition. I'd love if you'd tell that story about how you friended your competition and just the benefits you gained from that. Because we often think, again, counterintuitively, I need to build up these big walls between me and my competition, but you prove the opposite in this chapter.
That's gracious of you. Challenge 15, friend your competition. I'm 53 in a few months. And I was in sales for the first 15 years of my career, in marketing and executive leadership as an author or speaker in the last 15 years. And I think there were two sort of sales methodologies that drove a lot of sales tactics when I was in sales. That was your personality ethic, right? Were you charming? Were you charismatic? How shiny was your briefcase? What kind of customer service did you give? That's long been since debunked between being now a trusted advisor, right? And an expert on crafting a solution that meets your client's needs, or walking away and saying, we're not right for you, right? That trusted advisor. I think the other adage that's been debunked, or system or process or principle, is demonize your competition, right? Know all of your competitors' weaknesses, trash them, tear them down, have the grid, this versus that. I couldn't tell you Ken Blanchard's content from Vital Smarts. They're good people. They're well-intended. They're healthy competitors for wallet share of Franklin Covey. We don't trash them at all. It never crossed my mind. That's like so 1980s. Mm-hmm. Stop trash talking your competition, right? Be glad you're their competition because they're helping build a marketplace, right? They're helping give legitimacy to the fact that people need a solution in your realm. But I don't even care about your competition's strengths or weaknesses. Sell on your own. Right. When someone asks you, well, how do you differ from so-and-so? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Tell me about them. They sound great. If what they have is right for you, buy their product. Right. If what I have is right for you, buy our product. So this was a conversation around Vital Smarts, which is the consulting company behind the wildly popular book, Crucial Conversations. They're a healthy competitor of ours in Utah. One of our founders left and founded that firm 25 years ago. Loved their book, Crucial Conversations. And so through a series of insights you can learn, hopefully from reading the book and buying the book, I decided to call up their chief marketing officer and, arch rivals. This kind of thing is never done, right? Right. But I think the CEO thought I was going to go and spill my guts. I'm thinking, hey, I'm an executive officer in the firm. Do you really not trust me to have lunch with? He's a good guy. Long story short, you can see in the story I share a lot of insights and wisdom that came from an initially on guard kind of lunch to now it is a very dear friendship and a tremendous amount of appropriately shared wins and losses. Right. A great example. I was late to the game as the CMO on implementing marketing automation to Franklin Covey. Eloqua, Marketo, HubSpot, all that kind of stuff, right? Some call it Eloqua. I think it's called Eloqua. And so we were on the verge of buying one of those. And it was through my lunches with Mary McChesney, the vice president of marketing at Vital Smart, that she said, no, we've been there. Don't do that. Here's what we're doing. And honestly, we avoided a $250,000 mistake because, your CRM and your marketing automation system, your first one is never your last one. You always have to go through the wrong one first till you find the right one. And I'm telling you, it was through that friendship that I saved the company $250,000. And she would call me and say, what kind of call to action do you have on your emails? And how do you market your webinars? And most people would have thought that was heresy. No. I was listening to her carefully and she was listening to me, and we never put each other in an uncomfortable position. Or we would simply say, yeah, I can't disclose that, or I can't talk about that. But what I can tell you is this. And I think more of that should and will happen. And sometimes that's how mergers happen, right? Sometimes a merger happens or an acquisition happens or some kind of synergy because you're at a table and you say, well, actually, you know what? I know her. You want me to have her introduce you to the CEO or the board of directors, right? Or whatever it is. And I just think gone are the days of trash talking and dressing down your competition. If that's your value proposition, shame on you.
Yeah. And as a small business owner, just to reiterate what you just said, we own a small bike shop and we have friended our competition because there are times when we don't have the right product for our clients, and we are glad to send them over to the other bike shops that can meet their need. And you'll even catch us out riding bikes with some of the managers and owners of the other local bike shops.
Yeah.
And it goes back to chapter 1. When you actually create synergy with your competition, you serve your customer better at the end of the day. Because to your point, Scott, if you guys had misspent on that marketing product, that, or excuse me, your CRM, that cascades into unnecessary overhead in the company. And so when you look at it holistically, it always benefits the customer at the end of the day, which is what we're working for, to the point of this book.
Tiana, this was not always a practice for me, right? In my 20s, you could never have convinced me that I should have the long-term best interest of my client in mind. I'd be like, I got to make my quarterly goal or I'm getting fired, right? I need to find $14,000 the next 4 days. I'm not going to sell my client, I'm not going to dupe them. But if, they think it's good enough and I think it's good enough, I'm going to close the deal. Now, you couldn't now get me to sell a client anything that wasn't screaming the right match, because I understand the principle that your brand is your reputation, and your reputation is merely the collection of all the decisions you make in life. Next to your soul, if you're a spiritual person, your reputation is your most valuable asset. So for those younger listeners on your program, listen from an old sage, which is always think long-term. In your marriage, in your fights, in your arguments, in your social posts, in your 401k, and how much money you spent at Nordstrom today. In every aspect of life, think long-term, including how you deal with your clients.
Oh, you know what? I want to just restate what you just said because it's so invaluable. I do a lot of life coaching, and this is a conversation I have with all my young clients. It's exactly what you just said, Scott, which is think long-term. If you can think long-term with your finances, if you can think long-term with your career, if you can think long-term with your relationships, you will set yourself up for success. And by the way, I'm going to pick on you a little bit for talking about being so old. One of my best friends, 67 this year, and we go and run about 15, 20 miles together on the weekend. So you're still way under that old age. I like how you keep trying to hit it, but you're still way under
Tiana,
it.
At every juncture, you are reinforcing or bringing to life the same ideas that I'm teaching. One of those is friending up. Yes. And you didn't ask me this, but in my next book, which is Job Nest to Career Success, coming out in January 2022, one of the 30 challenges is friend up.
Yes.
And this isn't about, opportunism, right? This is about finding people who are older, wiser, smarter, wealthier, more bankruptcies, more cultured, more traveled. All of my friends are 15 years older. My wife is 12 years younger than I am. And when we met, she's like, why are all your friends ready for retirement? Why are we going to Greece with people who are my parents' age?
Yeah.
And then she came to realize, oh, these are really smart people.
Yeah.
These are people who've been and made the same mistakes that we're facing, and we're learning a ton from these. Look forward to the chapter Friend Up and Job Nest to Career Success.
No, I can't wait. And Scott, that is such an invaluable piece of advice that you just shared. And I did a podcast on a very similar topic, and you're 100% right. I can say this, and I think you would probably say the same thing. any modicum of success I've had has been because I learned it from somebody smarter than me.
Yeah, every time. And some people mishear me as saying, well, don't help people who can't help you. No, that's not what I said. I mean, 2 hours today was dedicated to helping people publish their books that I'll never meet again.
Yeah.
No, I am the result, like you, of people lifting me up, and I'm lifting others. But I learn more, and my success comes from following people who've had more mistakes than me and more successes, so I also can pass them on. But you can't pass on your wisdom if you're not learning it from people that have been ahead of you.
Exactly. You be humble enough to ask for help, and you'll find that people that you want to learn from are glad to teach you.
It's so true. Yeah. Why are you and I not writing a book together? I'm calling you after this.
Okay, let's do that. I would love to write a book.
You don't need me, but I need you.
I like how you said that, but I think it's the other way around, but I'll go with that just because,
so.
Okay, now this next challenge. So I'm going to just give a quick intro to this. One of the most important people to the topic we just talked about in my life was my grandfather before he passed away, an incredibly brilliant businessman and very successful. And he taught me this concept, and you do a great job reiterating it in chapter 17. Hire people smarter than you. And he said to me early on, he said, Tiana, surround yourself with people smarter than you and then get out of their way. And I think Steve Jobs is quoted with saying something very similar, hire people smarter than you, then get out of their way. And this, you did such a great job talking about this in this chapter that I'd love for you to articulate on this a little bit more, because this is something so incredibly important, and it dovetails perfectly with what we were just talking about.
First, Tiana, thank you for reading my book. And not every podcast host is able to read a book, and some don't ever read them. I get that. But when a host comes along like you, that takes this conversation so seriously that you read the book, I'm very much indebted to you. So thank you for that. It's why your podcast is increasingly so influential and followed. This is a concept, again, I stole from someone else, stole with credit. Liz Wiseman, the book Multipliers.
Yes.
To quote you, I think Multipliers is the most impactful leadership book that I've read in the past decade. And I've spent 25 years in the leadership industry leading Franklin Covey's leadership books.
Right.
And Liz says that, no one wants to work for the smartest person in the room. And your job as a multiplier of talent is to not be the genius, but to be the genius maker. Mm. And as the chief marketing officer for a global public company, for 8 years, almost twice the national tenure of a CMO, I had some successes. I had some messes. I shared them, a lot of them in the book, obviously, good and bad. And I realized that as the CMO, I thought my job was to be the smartest person in the room, the most creative, the most well-read, the most energetic, the most indefatigable. There was a joke in the division, best idea wins as long as it's Scott's. And it was a joke, kind of, not so funny. And so it was after reading Liz Wiseman's book that I realized I wasn't secure enough to hire people who I felt were smarter than me. Now, the fact of the matter is, I'm sure they were much smarter than me, but my perception of them was they might eclipse me. They might expose me because of this idea of imposter syndrome we all have. Mm-hmm. So I think I did a disservice to the company, the clients, the shareholders, by being so insecure that I wasn't confident enough to go out and find the world's expert on SEO, the world's expert on Google Analytics, the world's expert on marketing automation, and bring them in. I was threatened by them. Mm-hmm. So what I did instead was hire people who were competent enough and nice enough, and I could control them so that I was, posturing as the pontificate, if you will. And when I read her book, I stepped down. No one asked me to leave. I could have stayed in the role, but I actually stepped aside probably 2 or 3 years, even before I would have been asked to consider, a new role. But I realized that I wanted to change my leadership style, and that I was what Liz calls the idea fountain. She writes about 9 accidental diminishing tendencies: the optimist, the strategist, the pace setter, the rescuer, the protector. And I was the idea guy, the idea fountain, right? Just always come up with all the ideas whereby nobody else ever had to have any. And so I think it takes a confident person to demonstrate the humility to hire people smarter than you. Not just hire them, but retain them, attract them and retain them. And not just hire, attract and retain them, but to pollinate them throughout the organization.
Right.
Move them to supply chain, move them to operations, move them to finance, move them to the Rome office. Because what happens is some leaders are humble enough to recruit smarter people. They're smart enough to retain them, but they hold them tight in their division. I think it's the absolute best multipliers that release them and then go back and they can survey across the entire company or the marketplace. These are the people that I actually helped grow. That's your legacy. Now, that might be Pollyanna in some companies because you can multiply yourself out of a job in some companies. So there's a fine balance. But this was a total mess for me. And I shared it in the book because I think it will transform someone's contribution if you're seen as being confident and humble and vulnerable enough to thrive on higher people that show you up and take delight in it. What's that term? Now, teach that to me. What does that mean?
Yeah,
I've heard of that, right?
Right.
That's the boss you want to work for. That in a meeting, someone brings up a term like, now, what's machine learning and how does machine learning differ from AI? Right? Teach me. Because everybody else is dying to know. They're just not confident enough and humble enough and vulnerable enough to ask that question. So the leader sets the standard.
Yeah.
Took me a while to learn that. It did not come easy to me.
Well, and that's why Liz's book is so important. And another great book that talks about this is Jim Collins' Good to Great. It's what a level 5 leader is. Exactly. And, again, going back to what I was saying, if you are a leader and you don't take developing your leadership skills serious, now is the time. This is your call to action. Read multipliers, read Good to Great. And I remember I gave it to one leader and he came back to me and said, no, that wasn't very good. And I was like, red alert.
I'm going on record here to say I have 30 years in my career. You are the most competent podcast host I've ever been interviewed by. Your knowledge and command of these leadership principles that I spent 30 years studying, struggling with, and teaching. Tiana, you're the bomb. I'm telling you, you're the most competent podcast host I've ever been interviewed by.
Thank you, Scott. That means a lot to me. It really does. Coming from you, that is
true.
Now I've got to stop blushing. But
if the bike thing doesn't work out, I can tell you, Franklin Covey would love to hire you as a leadership consultant.
Well, good. It sounds like we'll have some chatting to do after this podcast. But I want to continue on that because there's something else really important that Liz points out in her book, and that also Jim Collins points out in their book. Good leaders know how to ask great questions. And I think Einstein once said, if you give me an hour to solve a tough question, I'm going to spend the first 45 or a tough problem. I'm going to spend the first 45 minutes asking the right question. And I think that hire people smarter than you come from a place of asking great questions, which, by the way, Will Wise's book, Ask Great Questions, another must read for leaders. Because
I haven't read it.
Yeah, that one is I gave it to one of my friends who's a founder. Yeah. Ask Great Questions by Will Wise. I gave it to one of my friends who's a founder and CEO. And he said, I read it twice and it's changed how I work with people, because it brings you to that place where you show up with natural curiosity, openness, willing to listen and learn from those around you, which again dovetails. Now, Scott, this is the part of podcast where I get sad because I literally have 5 other chapters to go through, but I know we're getting short on time and I want to be respectful of your time because, again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to reach out to me, send me your book, giving me your time to be on this podcast. So I'm going to have to skip over some of the chapters I wanted to go through. I'm sorry, but that's why everybody needs to get the book and read it because there's a lot of great stuff in here. So I'm going to pick one last chapter out of the chapters we had to go through. How do I pick which one? I'm going to go with this one. It wasn't the last one I wanted to end on, but I think this was such a great one. Challenge 23, leverage your promoters. And I think this kind of goes with work smarter, not harder. And so I'd love for you to, expound upon this a little bit.
Well, I think the big idea, and again, most of the ideas I'm sharing here are not genius or brilliance. They're most of them are just reminding your viewers and listeners of, principles they already know. I think we get stuck in this trap as marketers, as sales representatives, as sales leaders, where we're always in the hunt for new customers and new clients, and we don't spend as much time and attention taking care of those that, as I write in the book, kind of those who brung you to the dance, right? As my father used to say, is what are you doing first to identify all of your current promoters? How are you nurturing them? How are you giving them good news and accurate news and insights to be your evangelist, right? To quote the Net Promoter Score from Fred Reichheld, the ultimate question. Are you a promoter? Are you a passive? Are you a detractor? And so I think it's just a mindset of, are you balancing your time about constantly in new client acquisition phase? And are you, because that's more exhilarating, that's more invigorating, more expensive, but it's definitely more validating, right? To have more new people coming in. And what are you doing over here to make sure that your most loyal customers, those that have the best experience with you, that could evangelize your products for you, oh, I don't know, for free, it's not as fun, right? It's not as fun. I read a lot in this book around how a lot of marketers do what they love and know best, and they neglect the parts of the business that are the most challenging and sometimes the most vital, and they unfocus themselves out of business. This chapter is just a reminder to, I think I share a story of Chick-fil-A in here. Like them, hate them, love their founder, hate their founder, put all that aside. Be willing to change your mind about what they're doing right. Why are there, I don't know, 85 cars in line every day from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then again from 4:30 to 9:30? They're doing some things right. A, they treat their employees extremely well.
Right.
And B, I share in the book, their biggest problem is they can't build on-site freezers large enough to stockpile all the chicken they're going to sell that day. Can you imagine that being your problem? Oh, I don't have a closet big enough to sell all the sweaters my customers are going to want to need today. Right? Amazon doesn't have warehouses. Oh, they do. Their warehouses are big enough. You get the point. The chapter, I think, is brilliant, not because I wrote it, but it's an insightful analysis of what Chick-fil-A does well to promote and to take good care of their current customers and their promoters.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about some really key things in here about identifying who your promoters are. How often do you communicate with them? Do you have feedback mechanisms? I'm not going to spoil, the entire chapter, but it's so important to understand who they are and leverage that. And again, as a customer, we've all been in that scenario where, say it's maybe your cell phone company or your cable company, whoever it is, they're so busy acquiring new customers that they give better deals to their new customers than their existing clients. And you're going, wait a minute, I've been loyal to you for 15 years. How is the new guy getting a better deal than me? And so, that goes along part and parcel with this as well. Treat those that have been loyal to you well.
I think it's a business principle that is violated the vast majority of time. I mean, think about all the businesses you frequent and how few of them ever reach out to you.
Right.
I mean, my dentist might send me a postcard once a year. It's your birthday. I mean, I've bought, how many pairs of glasses have I bought from lens crafters? I never hear from them.
Right.
I mean, how many cars have I bought from this one dealership? I don't hear from them. It's fun. It's intuitive. It's thrilling, exhilarating to be marketing to new people. It's insanely less expensive and maybe less validating, but a lot more profitable to exercise the discipline to keep giving your promoters reason to buy and to market for you for free. Free sales force, no commission.
Right. Well, and you know this as well as I do. Word of mouth is such a powerful form of marketing. And
good and bad.
Yeah, good and bad. Right. But for those people that are loyal to you, that word of mouth marketing is huge. And that's, again, why I was so glad to have you on the podcast, because, I've learned a tremendous amount from you. And I really hope that my listeners dive into your books, get on your podcast, learn from you as well, because what's the saying? A high tide raises all ships, right?
Yeah.
And so I know on that note, we're getting short on time. So I just want to say, Scott, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. Now, in closing, I want to make sure everybody knows where they can find you. So where can they find you? I know you're on LinkedIn, you are on Instagram. So tell everybody where they can find you and get your new book.
My wife says I'm way overexposed. You can find me at scottjeffreymiller.com. That's my website. The new book is marketingmessbook.com. If you Google Scott Jeffrey Miller, you're likely to have me pop up to get my wife's horror. You can buy the books everywhere. It comes out on May 11th. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. I just finished taping the audiobook last week. That was a labor of love because as a stutterer, you can imagine how many times I had to repeat my sentences in the book. It was a labor of love at 5 o'clock most mornings in a studio on a not so great part of Salt Lake City, Utah, with a great producer. But I'd love to have you connect to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, I'm there. But if you want to learn more about the book and how to buy the cards also, the card decks are a great companion to the book. You can visit scottjeffreymiller.com, and the card decks come as part of any keynote speeches I give. No PowerPoints, no handouts. I don't do that at all, but everybody does get a deck of cards. That's always a fun thing to use and keep as well. Yeah, Tiana, thank you for the platform today. I appreciate you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Scott. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, you can subscribe, like, share this content. Please tell everybody about this episode. This was a fantastic episode. And Scott, thank you again so much.
My honor.
Thank you for tuning in. New episodes are released on the second and fourth Monday of every month. If you like this content, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell anyone else you think that will enjoy joining us on this journey to tune in. Until next time.